Previously in our series on Roman history, we've covered the last civil war of the Roman Republic. Octavian won, and when the son of Caesar entered the floor of the Senate on the 13th of January 27 BCE, he delivered a masterstroke of political acumen that placed him securely at the top of the Roman political world. But politics is more than the acquisition of power, it is also the game of its retention. By the end of the first decade of Octavian's tenure as princeps, he had already left a blood-stained legacy that would secure the label of tyrant in the modern world. However, the informal practices and institutions he cemented in place would ensure both the permanence of his office and of Roman rule in the centuries to come. Welcome to our series on the establishment of the Roman Empire, the rule and the fate of Octavian's Julio-Claudian dynasty. Unlike many praetorians of the Roman emperors, this little guardian will never betray you. It's never gonna give you up, never gonna let you down, never gonna run around and desert you. It's the last day to purchase our exclusive plushie. 24 hours to support our channel and have a hug buddy forever. Thank you for supporting us. While Cassius Dio's tale of Octavian entering the Senate floor on the 13th of January and giving a rousing and impassioned speech only to humble himself by relinquishing his powers and obligations is evocative, today it's believed that these political concessions by both parties were the result of a series of events that took place over the course of 28 and 27 BCE. The so-called First Settlement was a mix of religious and political legitimization of Octavian's authority, backed by military force, and a political purge of potential opponents. Over the course of 28 BCE, he used his authority to raise new patrician families, patronize clients, and restore many vacant priesthoods, temples, and senatorial positions by filling them with his supporters. He had also issued an edict which nullified any emergency measure or power granted during the civil wars that was in violation of Roman law. This likely allowed Octavian to circumvent unfulfilled promises and obligations rather than remove power granted to him by the Senate. The date of the 13th of January was critical only in the public visage of restoring the Republic. Octavian's refusal of the Senate's acclamations and his gradual relenting was a political feint in which he and his supporters all fulfilled predetermined roles. These so-called concessions did little to restrict his power. He remained the consul and the princeps senatus, meaning a senator with the highest seniority and precedence. Critically, his retention of proconsular imperium left him with control over Gaul, Spain, Cilicia, Syria, and Egypt, giving him direct control of about 20 of the remaining 27 legions, combined with the potential of raising loyal veterans from more than 30 other legions he had settled throughout the core of the empire. 3 days later, the Senate met again, ready to confer additional honours upon their supposed saviour. Octavian rejected the name of Romulus on the ground that he had been a king, an office despised by the plutocrats and populace alike. Instead, L. Minatius Plancus stood before the Senate and proposed a decree. Octavian accepted a brand new honorific of Augustus, or Illustrious One, an innocuous name which implied a position at the head of the Roman religious cult. He was also granted the Corona Civica, a laurel wreath bestowed upon those who saved Roman citizens from death. This grant drew some ire, as many remembered the massacres Augustus and his men had committed during the civil wars. But nonetheless, the detractors conceded. None of these concessions, however, made Augustus an emperor. Still, his role as sole princeps governing affairs of the state and gradual implementation of informal administrative practices would ensure the office became a permanent institution. Despite the supposed limitation to his own power, Augustus was effectively in control. The years between 27 and 23 BCE saw him curtailing the ambitions of both his rivals and supporters. Shortly after the first settlement, both Gaius Cornelius Gallus and Marcus Licinius Crassus, grandson of the former triumvir, had stepped outside the bounds of the new political order and found themselves stripped of their properties and careers. First, Gallus had been appointed as Augustus's representative in Egypt, one of the most critical positions in his new order and a major privilege for one of his close supporters. He made a critical error, though, allowing the Egyptian people under his governorship to erect statues with inscriptions of his deeds, even inscribing them on the temples of the pharaohs and the pyramids, which elevated him to a level of notoriety Augustus found distasteful. As a result, Augustus quickly had him removed and replaced. his successors quelling any pharaonic ideas. On the other hand, Crassus attempted to dedicate the armour of a slain enemy to the Temple of Jupiter, an act that would overshadow Augustus's virtue. The matter was settled by allowing him to hold the triumph, but then prevented from ever again holding any position of notoriety. Augustus's early governorship was a careful balance of appointing supporters, members of the old patriciate, and staunch republicans in order to maintain his position, but he was soon criticised for nepotism. The gradual granting of political privileges and exemptions to his nephew Marcellus, whom many believed to be his potential successor, came to a head during the trial of Marcus Primus, former proconsul of Macedonia. The claim that not only Augustus, but a private individual favoured by him could give orders in defiance of the Roman Senate was shocking to the Roman political order. Terentius Varro Murena, co-consul to Augustus, was conducting the trial, and upon attending the trial, Augustus was immediately accosted for his presence, as he was not invited. When called to the witness stand and asked why he was there, Augustus responded that it was for the public welfare, leading to the jeering of Murena by the attendees. The acquitting of Primus, however, damaged Augustus's reputation. By 23 BCE, Augustus had garnered enough opposition that his co-consul Murena instigated a conspiracy against him. Unfortunately, many of the details are lost, but it is known that both Murena and his conspirators were put on trial and sentenced to death in a political purge. A second conspiracy by Ignatius Rufus was also exposed, and he and his supporters were purged. Augustus was clearly treading precarious waters. In the late spring of 23 BCE, Augustus and Marcellus both fell seriously ill. The princeps was forced to retire to what he believed was his deathbed. Unable to attend to affairs of state, he called a private meeting of his most trusted legates, magistrates and senators to address the crisis. Augustus tactfully delegated his authority. To his right-hand man, Marcus Agrippa, he gave his signet ring, while to Calpurnius Piso, a staunch supporter of Brutus and Cassius, an opponent of Caesar, and dedicated republican, he handed over the military rosters and the finances of the state. This act was a major recovery for his image after the scandal with Murena and Marcellus, reassuring his political opponents and the populace that he would continue to maintain at least an image of republican rule. After his recovery, Augustus ceded the consulship in what is known as the Second Settlement. He was granted a greater form of proconsular authority with permission to cross the Pomerium and retain it in Rome itself, as well as the power of a tribune of the plebs. This latter power gave Augustus the ability to convene the Senate, the power of veto, the power to preside over elections, and the privilege of speaking first at any session while sidelining the office to equestrian appointments. This second settlement was abruptly followed by a food shortage in 22 BCE, which detractors claimed was engineered by Augustus himself to publicly reject the official dictatorial position while subtly acquiring more powers. Allegedly, Augustus dashed out of the Senate, tore apart his clothing, and bore his naked chest, exclaiming that he would rather die at the hands of the mob than restore the dictatorship. While a raucous display, the affair gave Augustus control over the city's food supply, the Cura Annonae, and with his proconsular authority over Egypt, he alleviated it with ad hoc measures and at his own expense. He also engineered the Senate to offer him the powers of the censor, which again Augustus initially rejected. However, when two candidates failed to appear, the role was assumed to be unable to be fulfilled by anyone but the princeps, and so he was given the powers of the censor to protect the public interest, conduct the census, and edit the roster of the Senate. Thus, Augustus tactfully engineered a further consolidation of power and improved his public standing through this crisis. Augustus's rejection of the dictatorship and his stepping down from the consular seat had major implications for public unrest. In 21 BCE, Augustus again declined the consulship, summoning the rival contestants to meet him in Sicily. However, upon his return to Rome, the unrest became worse and only subsided when Quintus Aemilius Lepidus, a former supporter of Antony, was selected. Augustus recalled Agrippa to handle the situation, but even he could not quell the riots that again erupted over further elections, forcing him to suspend them and leave positions vacant. Riots would continue, however, for many subsequent consular elections. Again in 19 BCE, people swarmed the streets of Rome when Augustus again declined the consular chair, committing vandalism, muggings, and murders. With mobs of supporters of each faction openly fighting in the streets, this time Augustus personally selected and appointed the consul. Ultimately, this practice would lead away from the election and to the selection of consuls by the princeps, although that would happen gradually. The remaining decades of Augustus's reign saw more subtle changes to his position. In 19 BCE, Augustus ended the proconsular triumph, only allowing it for his family members. Instead, military victories were carried out by his proconsular and senatorial legati, mostly distinguished members of the old patrician families, who had to be content with medals. Thus, Augustus made all military victories to be in his name, as protector of the Roman people. The next year, 18 BCE, was a critical year as it saw the end of the 10-year office Augustus had been granted in 28 to 27 BCE. While the details are again lost, the Senate renewed Augustus's office for another 5 years alongside the imperium of Marcus Agrippa. Augustus's taking of proconsular imperium had been a masterful gambit. As long as there was trouble on the frontiers, he could justify its renewal, and there would always be trouble on the frontiers. That same year, Augustus and Agrippa undertook the task of revising the roster of the Senate, increasing the minimum wealth census from 400,000 to 1 million sesterces, and further reducing the number of eligible families to 600. However, it had been a dangerous move. The initial attempt to reduce the pool of senators by lot had failed due to corruption and other schemes used to circumvent elimination. Augustus changed his tactics, allowing disbarred senators to return, but the process had offended many to the point where plots against his and Agrippa's lives surfaced. To finish the task, Augustus appeared before the Senate wearing armor hidden underneath his vestments, wary of extreme resentment by many of the underqualified or politically unsavory senators. But this failure with lots ultimately allowed Augustus to personally choose which families would continue to be eligible for senatorial positions. As the wealthiest man in the empire, he was also able to donate funds to many families to retain their eligibility. Equestrians were subsequently forbidden from wearing the wide purple clavi of senators, and only Augustus himself could accept candidacy applications for senatorial offices from new families. In 13 BCE, Augustus also reduced the number of the vigintis ex viri, or lesser magistracies, that paved the way to Senate candidacy from 26 to 20, reducing competition for advancement and giving himself greater control over administrative functions of the empire. Finally, in 5 CE, Augustus passed a law stating only senators and equestrians could sit on electoral commissions, effectively eliminating any semblance of validity in elections. Despite this consolidation of power, some of the Senate's authority was expanded under Augustus as well. Augustus created numerous commissions of senators to see to the bureaucracy of maintaining the empire, including overseeing the initial firefighting corps, maintaining the aqueducts, maintaining public buildings and temples, and declaring public property. The most important of these was a committee consisting of the 2 consuls, 1 praetor, 1 tribune of the plebs, 1 aedile, 1 quaestor, and 15 other senators, all rotated every 6 months or 1 year, excepting Augustus and Agrippa. The point of this committee was to serve as a focus group for Augustus to discuss political issues before introducing them to the broader Senate for approval, ultimately increasing his control over the Senate and their support of his positions. That year, Augustus also reduced the length of the consulate to 6 months, increasing the number of senators who would benefit from the prestige of the position. More importantly, Augustus gave the Senate the ability to hold trial courts for major political crimes and against other senators, after his daughter Julia was embroiled in scandalous affairs with multiple members of senatorial families in 2 BCE. Representing a hypocritical disavowal of his own anti-adultery laws, Augustus chose to make the incident a public affair by bringing her to trial before the Senate, albeit the outcome was rigged. Additionally, this set a precedent for Augustus's ability to exile via edict, as was the case with the poet Ovid, who was somehow involved in the events. More importantly, this gave the Senate the ability to enact legal judgments without the need to pass laws, and inherently intertwined its judicial functions with imperial politics. Publicly, Augustus continued to reinforce his position with ostentatious festivals and the restoration of offices. In 17 BCE, he declared that it was time to hold the Ludi Seculares, an Etruscan tradition that held that when nobody was left alive and had witnessed the beginning of a century, a new one began. This was a not-so-subtle statement by Augustus that he was heralding a new age, hosting circus games, theatre performances, animal sacrifices, and hunts as head of the College of 15 Priests and dedicatee of the patron of the princeps, Apollo. Augustus and Agrippa personally performed the sacrifices and ritual purification as consular equivalents, acting on behalf of the res publica, standing under the moonlight before a massive bonfire lit with pitch, brimstone, and torches. On the third and final day, the famous poet Horace delivered a panegyric at the climax of the event, sung by 54 youths in the Temple of Apollo. Augustus's religious role would increase with his assumption of the title of Pontifex Maximus in 12 BCE after the death of the ex-triumvir Lepidus. This allowed for an even greater spectacle, as throngs of Romans from across Italy poured into Rome to elect the new Pontifex on the 6th of March, anointing him their closest representative with the gods. He restored the priesthood of Jupiter Optimus Maximus and the office of Flamen Dialis, which had been left vacant since 87 BCE during the tyranny of Sulla. As Pontifex, Augustus moved the official residence to his palatial estate and appointed his wife Livia as keeper of the sacred flame at the shrine of Vesta, tying together his secular role as protector of the Republic to that of the virgins' role as the religious guardians of the res publica. Thus, Augustus's religious role further tied his identity, and by extension his new office, to Rome itself. The final culmination of this identification was on February 5th, 2 BCE, when Augustus was granted the title of Pater Patriae, Father of the Country, for ensuring the providence of Rome's future. This was, to Augustus, his crowning achievement, ending his own writings at this point in his Res Gestae. The honour had only been granted to 3 men before him: Camillus, Cicero, and Caesar, and most importantly, it was held by the legendary figure of Romulus. Augustus's early consolidation of power was not sudden, but a gradual and ad hoc process. It took advantage of existing republican institutions to make it appear as if every right and privilege was part of the Mos Maiorum, or the existing cultural and legal tradition. In doing this, Augustus cleverly exhibited extreme political acumen, while also retaining flexibility in his position and for his successors. Much of the rest of Augustus's tenure would also be characterized by the establishment and consolidation of informal or ad hoc measures. Augustus was not truly an emperor in the tyrannical sense of absolute authority, often envisioned of Roman rule, and only very late among the Julio-Claudians would something we'd recognize traditionally as a Roman emperor become characteristic of the princeps seat. Instead, Augustus was in every way the head of the Roman Senate, exerting influence and pressure through policies, elections, commissions, and every tool he could muster to his disposal under the traditions and conservatism of Roman law. However, he could not have done it alone. Augustus was surrounded by a cadre of close supporters, bolstered by the senators, equestrians, and veterans he tactfully pardoned at the end of the civil wars, and cemented in place through public popularity. These men around Augustus came from across the empire, diversifying the ranks of the Senate and the budding administration through colonies of citizens and veterans, producing magistrates and officers that led to the elevation of new patrician families. These men are the ones we'll look at in our next video, where we'll dive into the campaigns and careers of Augustus's generals. If you don't want to miss that and many other historical videos, make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button to see them. Please consider liking, subscribing, commenting, and sharing, it helps immensely. Recently, we've started releasing weekly Patreon and YouTube member exclusive content. Consider joining their ranks via the link in the description or button under the video to watch these weekly videos, learn about our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our private Discord, and much more. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one.